Thank you for joining us on Perspectives with Awesome Miss Silver. And of course, we're coming to you from downtown Worcester on Main Street from the great studios of WCCA-TV. It is time now to have not only Awesome's perspective, but a great guest as well. And Afnan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Communications Director for State Senator Jamie Eldridge.
Yes.
Well, congratulations on that. I understand fairly new, actually, to the job.
Yes, very new.
All right. So can I also ask, already I'll probably get in trouble, but how old are you?
24.
24. So
Yeah.
sort of recently out of school as well.
Yeah, a year out of school.
It seems to me that is very impressive to be able to hold this title and this job just a year out of college. Congratulations on that as well. I think one of the places that we want to start, obviously, is part of the perspective is that I am guessing that as you walk through the halls of the State House, do you see many others in positions such as yourselves who would be wearing the hijab or who are of the faith of Islam?
So actually, there isn't any. I think there.
You're it.
I think so. Yeah, that's what they were telling me. And I haven't seen anyone either. There's definitely a lot of Muslims. I think maybe not a lot, but there's a couple of Muslims. But I don't think I've seen anybody wear the hijab there yet.
Because one of the things that I think is very much in the news right now, and even Worcester just completed, obviously statewide there were elections. Worcester just completed their elections on Tuesday as well, and the conversation about diversity, about a city council, school committee, other elected bodies. You certainly know this from being elected in Holden. That looks like the population, that represents the population, is such a large part of the conversation today. It was just something that State Senator Jamie Eldridge is sort of in your hiring. Not that, and please, again, obviously qualified, but is that part of the equation that he's trying to, get a staff that mirrors what his district looks like?
No, I think it's actually definitely a reason for that. He wanted to bring voices from other communities that are not usually heard, and that was one of his his goals and his targets. And the staff, for his staff, it's actually really diverse, and he prides himself in that. And he sees it as a good thing that he's kind of drawing in all these different perspectives, and he actually listens, and he actually is like, tell me more because I'm not there, and I do want to hear it from you guys who are actually there. So this is something that he definitely is keeping in mind.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised when I found out that you got that job. I wasn't surprised because when I had first met the state senator, Jamie Eldridge, I met him when I was doing the Muslim festival, and I had contacted him to attend, and without any hesitation, he said, "I'm there. Let me know when you're doing another one." So I kind of knew that he was committed to diversity and committed to, and I've met him at the Democrat conventions too. But my curiosity is, why did you take this path? I know, I'm sure in your childhood is when 9/11 happened. Did that form or change or, determine which path you would take? Just your experiences in school, and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, I think that definitely 9/11 was a thought, and it was like a looming thought for me. But I think that's kind of like the biggest drive for that. I think because of such incidents that are happening, there has been a bigger need for people who look like me to be having seats at the table and to be actually doing things in that kind of position. There's the rhetoric that's going around currently and whatnot. It needs that person who can actually be like, no, this is what's actually happening in my community. This is what I'm witnessing, what I'm experiencing, and bringing in that perspective. Because if I don't do it, then who else is going to be bringing in these perspectives, right? An outsider can only know so much, but when you're actually involved in something, that's kind of what matters. So I think that was one of the biggest drives for me, is that kind of representation and having that inclusion and being able to help my community in that way, and drawing back and forth in that sense as well. For me, when I started off in college, I did journalism. So that was my major and my path. And there's a huge intersection between journalism and politics. But I initially started off just doing journalism, and I think that if anything, that kind of confirmed even more the need for it, because I was working in the campus newspaper, and I was the only person of color. in the entire staff, and there was like at least 30 people. So that for me was alarming to see that they didn't even, try to kind of like pull in people, but maybe there were people who were just afraid to even join such like an organization like that. But I saw how important it was, because a lot of the times, a lot of the stories that were covered were not really targeted towards minorities. Especially the Muslim community, like people weren't really asking those questions. The curiosity wasn't really there. So there wasn't really a voice for that community in the paper. So for me, that was like kind of eye-opening. I was like, wow, like they do need diversity. Like diversity needs to be there, just because like people need to be heard. Their stories need to be told. I know that there was a lot of stories that come to mind that I remember covering in school that weren't really addressed as much if I wasn't someone who would be like, hey, let's pitch the story, let's actually go out and report about this. And a lot of those would be like, the Muslim ban, and just like hearing about like Muslims and like how they felt about it, and like the experiences that they were going through. There was like the DACA recipients, like that was also a huge thing that happened in college at my time. There was also just like a lot of refugee and immigrant stories that were just like really popular, and like rhetoric was going like around about it in the media and all these places, and they just didn't know how to target these students on campus who were being directly affected by these stories. And I realized that like having that voice being there and being like, hey, let's reach out to this community and see what they have to say was so imperative. And it was really needed. And this is why there has to be different communities represented in such positions.
Yeah, that part is interesting though. So when you went and you joined, what was it that sort of drove you? And is there anything that is cultural about it? I mean, is it that just for whatever reason, white students grow up thinking, well, I can have a career path in journalism, and students of color feel that isn't a career path for them?
That's a really interesting question. I thought about it too, and I think that there's also probably a fear for a lot of Muslims to even join that type of realm, and it's a little uncomfortable, because you're going to be faced with a lot of things that you don't necessarily agree with, things that are against you as a person, against your community, against your religion, your culture. So it's not something that people are going to jump at, and be like, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. I think it's definitely a very difficult path to take. And I think that was maybe what steered some people away. And I know that maybe whites sometimes, like in that kind of environment, maybe they're just not reaching out to Muslims and be like, hey, do you want to be like a journalist on this?
Well, it's an unconscious bias, right? I mean, nobody is. It's not bad people. Nobody is trying to do it, but
right.
Listen, it's not even all religion. So, middle age versus youth, all just different kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Suburban versus urban, all of that I would think would kind of play into some of that equation. Did your being in journalism and on that paper help break down any barriers? Was there anyone who saw you, and did it start to bring in new faces?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people were just like, oh wow, like you're actually doing this. And I'm sure there was people before me that graduated, but I think during my class, I think I was the only one. People were like, oh, like tell us more. Like we don't really see a lot of like Muslim women journalists, and like who are actually really passionate and are really involved in this field. So like what makes you want to do this? And like, oh, I've always wanted to do this, but instead I took this other because it's easier, and it's just like the more like, I guess, normal path to take, or whatever it is. So that definitely did happen. And even within the actual my staff themselves, like they were just like, wow, like thank you for actually bringing this to our attention, because like you said, they're just like not aware of it. It's not that they're like going out of their way to ignore it, just like they just want to be aware.
Well, you don't think of it, or coming at it, and it's not meant to be patronizing, but I mean, just even as we've done this show, you have a different perspective because of what you have experienced in your life, which no matter how much or how enlightened I may feel I am, I've never experienced that. I've never had any problem in a line anywhere. I've never had any problem being served. I've never felt, I mean, I've never had any of those experiences. So it's hard for it to occur to me that is happening to some people on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So what were your obstacles though? I mean, we talked, you're telling us that a lot of people were supportive and were surprised and happy that you're down this path, and, being one of those, warriors setting the path for other people. But I'm sure you've had obstacles. If you want to if you could like enlighten us with some of those obstacles and how you overcame them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious one was that like I was kind of alone in this path. Like in all of my classes and all of like the endeavors that I took in this field, there wasn't really anyone else that I can go to, that I can relate to, right? There wasn't that many mentors in my community that I can be like, hey, like I really need advice. I don't know what to do here. I'm getting all this kind of like criticism and I don't know how to handle it. And also like just from people who just don't know how to handle certain like language or just like how to approach someone who looks like me or comes from a certain culture. So I had to deal with a lot of that as well. And also just not having someone to like really go to because of like the lack of such mentors in that field.
Right.
So that was a big one for me personally.
I have to say though, on the politics of this, so a state senator such as Jamie Eldridge, who is more progressive, so not surprising that he breaks, and it seems to me he's breaking a barrier here.
Yeah.
When I was a little surprised when you said, yes, when I'm walking the halls, you're it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was expecting you to be a small group. I wasn't expecting it to be a minority of one. But the other part of it is, you're joining State Senator Jamie Eldridge, who is very progressive, who, as long as he has been in politics, has had a target on his back from conservative groups, and the things that are written, you got to have a thick skin to work for him, I would think. Just the things that are written about him on social media from people who go after him, it gets vicious. How do you deal with all of that? How do you not take some of that personally?
Honestly, he's amazing in the way he deals with it, and it really rubs off on me, and I like learn from that as well. He's very civil and he's very receptive. He says he wants to have a conversation. I think that's what makes him stand out, is that he's like, you know what, let's talk. It's not a matter of ignoring you. It's not a matter of like trolling you back. It's a matter of like, let's hear what you have to say so that you can sit with me and I can explain my side as well. And it's funny, every time he does that, they disappear. Every time he's like, oh, well, let's chat over coffee and see like why you're saying what you're saying, and all of a sudden they're ghosted. So I think that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
so now I get to tell the story of the first time that Asma and I met.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was doing a radio show, and we were continually getting calls from people about after acts of violence in the U.S. and and where are the quote unquote moderate Muslim voices, as if all of a sudden everybody, would have to stand up, as if I don't know, if an Episcopalian did something, suddenly I would have to come out and start talking for everyone. But in the climate at the time, I mean, this really was something.
A hot topic.
And I was trying desperately to find somebody who would come on the show just to sort of answer that question. And Asma came on. And before the program, and the phone lines were open, and before the program, people are calling in. Asma comes on, talks for an entire hour, call in, ask any question. You can be as I mean, I think we actually said you can be as insulting as you want. No, but it's exactly what you just said. But it'll be a conversation. Crickets. The next hour after Asma leaves, Hank, you were taken in. Everything that was said was a lie. Everything was. I mean, it was, and boom, everybody is right back. But didn't want to have the actual conversation with the person. It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
Yep. But that is how we met, and that's how this started.
It started, to get these different perspectives. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
But it's amazing that you went through this, but I guess I'm going to ask a very hard question. How did you get the support from the Muslim community?
I think the Muslim community is really willing to help and support you if you kind of make a convincing case. And I'm not saying like actually like going up to them and being like, here, this is what it is, but showing them the work that you're doing. I think they like seeing their results. I think that's what it was. I did a lot of reporting. I did a lot of like, visible things that you can actually access. I did like, documentaries. I was working on broadcasting things. So just seeing that for them, I think was very refreshing. And that's when they started hopping on this like wagon to really support me. It's just like, oh, wow. She can do X, Y, and Z. This is what we actually need. So I think it was a matter of them actually visibly seeing what they need and being like, oh yeah, this is what we need. So I think that's kind of what I would say helped me a lot.
Well, how much does your religion actually inform your job? I mean, there must be a lot of days when that has nothing to do with what you're doing in, working for the senator.
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, so I mean, we're kind of coming at it as asking you about all of these questions and having this job from the perspective of your religion. My thought would be that there's a lot of days that probably isn't relevant to your job at all, or is it always something that informs what you're doing in the state senator's office?
I think there's always some sort of relevancy in the aspect of values. Like, I don't think necessarily it's like what exactly is being taught, but like in the way I'm handling things day to day, in the way I'm like, interacting, dealing, engaging, I think that's where my religion comes in. It's like I'm tapping back into that to learn how to do that in the most civil and like, characteristic way possible. So I would say sort of it is there day to day. Topic-wise, not really. You're right. I don't really like see that every single day, but it will appear every now and then, and that's when I, find it really useful to go back and tap into my community.
Has he got you talked about? He won't troll people back, but have you, when people find out that he has hired you, has there been any blowback because of this?
If there is, he hasn't told me. So I don't. So far, so good. I'm hoping.
Yeah,
I'm sure
not.
there is. Yeah.
Honestly, probably. I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah.
I think sometimes because of the stories that we have, it's like anything. There's really far more people who are far more tolerant and could care less.
Right.
Than I think there are the small group that gets up in arms over everything.
But they're loud. The small group is loud.
They are. Yeah.
They are loud. Yeah.
Do you see yourself as pursuing politics yourself in the future? As a representative, a state senator, city councilor?
Haven't thought that far yet, but I think definitely staying in the realm is very important for me, especially now that I've seen the real work that can be done, and that fact that real change is actually, it happens in the State House. Local change, and sometimes it even gets to higher than that. But because I've seen how much work he's been able to do and the effect that's happening from people who are coming to him and they're just wow, this is you're super supportive, you're super helpful. I definitely want to stay in that realm because I think it's very, very important to have somebody like me to be doing that work and going back to my community and actually helping them in that sense. Because if I'm not going to represent, then who's going to step up and going to represent?
So as a minority, or at least I'm sure this is a broad topic, but we're talking about this because, as you said, you're one of the only Muslim women wearing a hijab in this kind of path. What qualities do you think someone should have if they want to pursue and follow the path that you have taken? What qualities or characteristics should they be prepared for, or should they have for them to be successful in the career path that you have chosen?
I would say two things. I would say patience and grit. It comes down to you're gonna have to wait. Things are not gonna come to you. I waited a very long time. I mean, after college too, it wasn't an easy path to find my way into the professional world, especially in what I really want to do, and not settling is very important. So I think having the grit that's where grit comes in, because you have to be super determined, and this has to be something that you're very passionate about, because it will be very easy to let go and be let me just settle and do something that's easier or more conformative. So I would say those two virtues pop up to mind.
Yeah. As you went through college and high school, where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Mansfield.
Mansfield, okay. Diverse community, or?
I went to a Muslim high school.
Muslim high school, okay. And then where did you go to college?
UMass Amherst.
UMass Amherst.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple of years before you, I also was at UMass Amherst.
Yeah.
What was your experience like there?
UMass was great in the sense that it was very liberal in some realms. There was a huge Muslim population because it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, so that was kind of the only people that we had. Our community had to be very, unified. But it was definitely, the minorities were still not the majority. Right, so there was still they were making strides to be more inclusive, but in that process, there was still a lot of mishaps that were happening. Whether it was residential, being in the residential housing and seeing a lot of racist remarks, on doors or bulletin boards or whatever it is, having to endure that, and also having to endure, classmates that were just not woke, not knowing what to say and what not to say, what's going to be triggering, what's not going to be triggering. So having to deal with that was a thing, but at the same time, I would say they're very good at trying to be as inclusive as possible, trying to actually hear us out, and trying to actually give us a platform to speak and do what we want to do and represent ourselves in the way that we do.
I think it's interesting. I didn't realize that the Collegian in 2019 or 2018 or whatever would have still been so white. I understand in my day,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
quite honestly, I mean, I'm just thinking about the floor in my dorm. I mean, there just weren't a lot of minority students at the time, but I would have thought that had changed some.
It's changing
over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah, change is slow, without a doubt. You know, you talk about people being woke as well. Do you find, and this may be a little bit off topic, but this is just one of my pet peeves currently, that people are constantly coming up and saying, "Oh, you know, everybody's so politically correct today," and then they use that as some sort of leeway to say some sort of bigoted remark, and it's like, well, wait a minute. You know, a lot of people are saying, okay, we don't have to be so politically correct, and we can have conversations, and you can be blunt about things. But hold on, it doesn't mean, oh, well, you know, I'm not very politically correct. Right. So let me say something that then most rational individuals will go, oh, no, you can't. You can't say that. As you're out with the senator, and even through your college experience, and just what you were saying about things being written on the dorms, was it to provoke a reaction, or was it just people just aren't really thinking?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think people, like you said, are a little upset that people are now sensitive to all these like terms and whatnot, and they're angry that they can't say it anymore. They're angry that there's like a reaction, but I think that's what gives them the thrill, is that they want to see that reaction, right? And they're not really having that sense of empathy enough for them to stop in their tracks. They're like, oh, well, who says I can't say this or whatnot? But I would always find that population was definitely the least. There wasn't that many people, but they were louder. So I guess that's why there was a lot more coverage towards them.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. What are you?
No, go ahead.
I mean, what are you working on with the senator right now?
So right now I'm working on a lot of his communication strategies with a lot of his policy and legislative agendas and goals. So I'm meeting up with a lot of like coalitions and advocacy groups in order to kind of like reach his goal and spread awareness about what he's trying to, pass. A lot of bills that he's working on, very progressive. But because they're very progressive, there's a lot of, attention towards it that could be negative sometimes. So what we're trying to do is like really show the bright side of what he's trying to do so more people can understand the work that he's doing. So I'm doing a lot of that. I'm also working a lot on his speeches, press releases, press conferences, a lot of the media as well. So I would say like the optic sides, which is very, very important with politics because that's 50% of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So making sure that side is also very sound and very valuable for him.
Yeah, and right. I mean, social media has got to be a huge
I'm sort
part
of
of it
curious. What happens if maybe in a particular policy you really disagree with something that he is for? How do you balance that? Because what your position is not just working for him, but to really advocate for his policies and get people on board. How do you handle that?
So the best thing about Jamie is that he's very understanding. Senator Jamie, I'm sorry. He's very understanding. And he's the type of person who, like I said, he listens. He definitely walks his talk. So if there's something that I don't agree with, we will have a very civil conversation about it. And he's very kind enough to be like, you know what, another staff member will take this, just because it's triggering to you or something that you don't want to deal with personally. And I respect that more than anything. I think that's something I adore about him very much.
That's a very good.
now.
It's rare. It's very rare.
I would think that would be rare.
Yeah. Otherwise, we told you to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. In almost any job. Well, you had said before that you didn't want to settle. How did this hiring come about, and were there other jobs along the way that you said no?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was almost very easy for me to settle. A lot of obstacles came in the path after graduation. It definitely was not easy. I would say this job is because of connections and because I put myself out there and I was doing a lot of things for free, which I got ridiculed for. People were saying, oh, why are you working for free? You have a degree, X, Y, and Z. So that was something that I dealt with a lot. But I actually interned for a whole year. I interned at Cambridge Community Television and WGBH. So I was doing, and I wasn't getting paid. So I was solely doing it for the experience because I was very passionate and I still wanted to do it. And I was like, I'm going to put this on my portfolio so that I do end up getting a job. So for a little bit, it was a struggle for me, obviously, because it was a whole year, and sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen at the end of the tunnel. But after a while, I got a phone call or got a text from someone who I used to volunteer for, which is Jetpack, and he was saying, I see a lot of the work that you're doing currently and previously, because I was very up to date with my portfolio, even though it was things that I was doing for free. And he was like, I want to see if you're interested in this position because I think you'd be really good for it and qualified. So that's kind of the start of how I ended up. position. Yeah.
When you were at UMass, were there certain stories that you were interested in doing, and have you been able to carry that through in working for the senator, some of those same interests?
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of immigration stories I was really, really interested in doing. A lot of prison reform I was also very interested in doing. And then I came and I found that he's actually very, very big on criminal justice reform, which is something I'm really passionate about. So I also took the lead on like doing work for that for him, and also Save Communities, which is immigration, which worked out for me very well as well. And I think that helped because a lot of my journalism passions were very issue-based. I was really able to transfer all these ideas and values to the work I'm doing now because he's also very issue-based.
Where do you think we are right now with Safe Communities in Massachusetts? I mean, does your office get a lot of calls from immigrants who are concerned?
Yes, I think we have a very long way to go. There's still a lot of people who are kind of resistant to the idea, which kind of surprised me and kind of didn't. So in that sense, we definitely have people who just don't understand the idea of immigrants or just understand the plights that go on with immigrants. So because of that misunderstanding, there seems to be that very like tough wall or like some sort of resistance where they're just not accepting the idea and they don't even want to listen to accept the idea. That's kind of what I've been seeing a lot.
You said it before. If you could get folks into the room together to sit down, and there's use this example, but about 10 years ago, we had a caller, and during this was really first kind of wave of some of these conversations, and it was a caller who was well known to the other callers. And one day he admits, he goes, "Listen, I get up and I go to work every day at the bakery," and he goes, "Yeah, I don't have a license. I'm not paying into the taxes because I came to this country like 25 years ago illegally, and I've got this job at the bakery." And it was really interesting to see the reaction, because it wasn't, "Well, throw him out." It was like, "Well, he's right, yeah, he's a good guy, and he gets up and goes to work, and we've heard what he has to say." And sometimes he had very conservative views, I mean, and so because he was known to people in the audience, it was different than hardliners who absolutely in the very next sentence were, "Everybody who is here illegally, please line up at noontime because we'll put you on the bus and we'll drive you to wherever it is that we want you to go."
Yeah.
And so it really is, part of it is just if we could just get people in the same room to have the conversation.
It really is just knowing people's stories, and that's kind of what I've been trying to explain to Senator Jamie as well, and he's very on board with it. It's really about storytelling at the end of the day, and it's really about empathy, and people are not going to know if you don't like meet that person, get to know them as a human, as an individual, and that's when you start kind of like shifting perspectives. But it all starts, like you said, with a conversation.
Well, and that's what we try to do here, and it's time for your perspective as always.
Yeah, I think, Afnan kind of, finished it up for me beautifully. The whole point of this show, Perspectives, is to actually have that conversation with people who you don't know, are not familiar with, and maybe taking a path that you had never considered. So I really hope that you enjoyed her interview. I thought it was very motivational for those minority groups, women, anyone who is going into a career path that they don't know. Find a mentor, find someone who actually paved some of that road for you, or be that person that paves that road. And hope you join us again on Perspectives.